Coming up on Chesapeake Collectibles.
The sword is something you should be very proud of. It's the nicest one I've seen.
It's a really special thing, and it must have looked really grand on a sideboard or a center table. I think it would look beautiful in any home.
This particular picture I picked up in an estate sale because of who it was autographed and presented to.
It looks very fun as a pillow fight. You see the one little fellow beating up the other one. But what's more fun about this is that it's really an allegory of the Franco-Prussian War.
Major funding is provided by... Since 1924, Alex Cooper Auctioneers has been serving the Mid-Atlantic states, featuring monthly gallery antique auction sales. Our staff can assist clients with the disposition of their valued possessions. Alex Cooper Auctioneers.
Hello and welcome to Chesapeake Collectibles, the show where surprises always lie in wait. I'm your host, Rhea Fiken. This series is a success thanks to all of you who cherish your family heirlooms and stories, and also thanks to the treasure seekers who are fascinated by a yard sale find. Either way, your antiques are our ticket to an amazing adventure through the byways of the past. So, let's continue this journey and see what fortune has brought us today.
I see you've brought in Theodore Roosevelt, one of our top 5 all-time popular presidents.
Absolutely, and one of my favorites, a guy with a lot of tenacity and guts.
And I believe that he's one of the portraits on Mount Rushmore.
He is.
So tell me about this particular picture.
Well, this particular picture I picked up a little while ago in an estate sale locally here in the Washington metro area, believe it or not, and I had seen the advertisement for it, literally got out and stood in line starting at 4 a.m. in the morning to make sure that I was one of the first, and I was literally the second person in the door, and this was the piece that I was interested in, not just because it's a great photo or print of Roosevelt and it's autographed, but because of who it was autographed and presented to is what was of interest to me.
And at the bottom, in cursive writing, what does it read?
It reads, "To Mrs. Douglas Robinson, Jr., with the love of Theodore Roosevelt, February 9th, 1904.
Mrs. Robinson was who?
Her first name was Corinne, and Corinne Roosevelt Robinson was Theodore Roosevelt's younger sister. And that's why this, I thought, was a really interesting and unique piece, because it's not just an autograph photo of Theodore Roosevelt, but it's to Theodore Roosevelt's younger sister and family members. So it's a family piece.
Yes, and that makes it more valuable. That's an added value attribute. And also, Corinne, like Theodore Roosevelt, was a Spitfire.
Absolutely.
She addressed the Republican National Convention in the 20s with an audience of 14,000 men mostly, and that was a first for women. And that was before women could vote.
Absolutely.
So in her own right, she was a celebrity in her own time. She was an author, a poet, and was well known in the celebrity circuit in Washington and New York. She married into the family that was related to President Monroe. Her husband was nephew to President Monroe. Another significant value attribute for this particular piece is what it originated from. John Singer Sargent's picture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this particular pose by Theodore Roosevelt was in
the White House.
And the pose has a certain story behind it.
It does, and that's what really adds to it, because when you think of the pose and the personalities, it's really an interesting story in that Roosevelt wanted his formal presidential portrait done, and he wanted it done by John Singer Sargent, the noted portrait artist of the wealthy and elite of America at that point in time. So he retains John Singer Sargent to come to the White House and paint the painting for him, but the personalities clash. Big personality with John Singer Sargent, even bigger personality with Theodore Roosevelt as to what the pose is going to be. And here you have the president saying, this is how I need to be posed and where I need to be posed, to John Singer Sargent saying, no, I'm not going to paint you that way. So they were going back and forth, and the story is that Roosevelt was, I've had enough of this and I'm going to go upstairs, and he starts up the stairwell and for some reason turns around abruptly, puts his hand on the rail. Sargent says, freeze, this is it.
And that was the pose that he captured.
This was the pose that he captured.
What we have right here. Now, when you found this, was it in good condition?
No, it actually was not. Having had experience in a museum environment, I knew that there were serious issues with the piece. First off, the print and the autograph were up against old glass, and that's a huge no-no because there's no room to breathe, and over time moisture gets in there and it'll stick. So I actually took this to one of the top conservators in the Washington metro area. They looked at the print literally under microscopes. The paper conservator noticed that there was microscopic mold on the paper that had to be killed and taken out. The paper was cleaned, it was preserved by the conservator. There was a mat added to it to separate the print from the glass, and then there's special UV glass that I had inserted to the original frame that also protects it against light. So where this hangs, I also am very careful about both natural light and man-made light hitting it so it doesn't over time wash the signature and the printout.
Yeah, that's very wise. So original print, original frame, conserved properly, restored back to its original condition. The president's autograph, as he was president, to his sister. All those are value attributes.
I just got it because I really like Theodore Roosevelt.
So do a lot of people. I could see this have a high replacement value of $2,500 to $3,000.
Wow, really?
Yeah, really.
That's great.
For all those various value attributes.
Well, I'm excited about it, and regardless of the value, I'm happy to have Teddy in the household.
And I'm glad you brought him in.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Well, thanks for coming into Chesapeake Collectibles. You have a really interesting table that you brought in today, and I was hoping you'd tell us a little bit about it. What is it, and how did you get it?
Well, I inherited it from my parents, who inherited it from my father's brother, who was a decorator, interior decorator in New York and Philadelphia. I was told it was a hunt table.
Right.
To use at a hunt breakfast.
Okay.
And that's about as much as I know about it.
All right. Well, you know a lot more than we saw when we brought it in, because there were a lot of folks kind of looking at it and wondering what it is. It's a very interesting, yet oddly kind of shaped table here. That's exactly what it is. It's called a hunt table. Some people call it a wine table. It is English. It's actually a Regency style, or late Regency style.
Okay.
And that word's important, style, because when we brought it in, it looked to be about 1820. But as we did some investigating, we saw that this is a later reproduction of that. Reproduction that dates to about 1885, perhaps 1890, maybe even the turn of the century.
All right.
But aside from that, we'll talk about some of the details on this. It's made of mahogany, solid mahogany. We have some really wonderfully carved legs around the front. The legs have what's known as reeding. That means it looks like a stack of straws together. And when we looked at them, we wanted to see whether those were made by hand or whether they were made by machine, and we determined they were made by machine. And then, of course, when we turned it over, we saw some of the tool marks that indicated that a shaper was used. So this is machined with some hand finishing. But when we look at it, what's the most important thing or interesting thing on this table? These little brass cups here that everyone wants to know what they are. These are known as chariots. They're little brass pots that are on the end of a rod, And the reason it's called a wine table, because bottles of wine were actually placed in here.
Pretty much what I suppose that was it.
Exactly, or warm beverages.
Yeah.
And then we have a little leaf that would come up on both sides so we could store the bottles. And it was a really functional table for the hunt or for entertaining. So we could move these little chariots around and individuals could reach over and get their drink. It was actually used by butlers and servers to serve people that would come in.
Yep.
It's supported by 4 brass casters. We also have a little rim here that would have supported a leaf if we were to remove these. A lot of these tables had a semicircle leaf that would be put in, and you could remove the chariots and then push this against the wall, and it would be a demi-lune table just for entertaining. So it's a real interesting functional piece, again, with the 2 leaves, early brass casters, and these little chariots. Have you ever had it appraised before?
Never.
Or talked to anyone about value?
Nope. No, we just used it.
Good, good. Yeah, this is still functional today. You could use it. The finish is nice, but if we were to put a price on it today, we'd probably be looking at auction, with the way the furniture market is, about $500 to about $1,000. If you were to go into a store, we would probably see a retail establishment offering it as high as $1,700 to $2,000. Just the difference. So not a big difference between what you might find at auction and what you would get in a retail establishment. But certainly an interesting piece of furniture from an earlier period. And even though it's a reproduction, it's still very functional.
Great.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it in because
Thank you. It's my
we didn't know
pleasure.
what it was.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome to Chesapeake Collectibles. I wanted to thank you for bringing in this beautiful blue glass Pokal, P-O-K-A-L, and that's the name of this form. And it's a pretty rare form, and I would call the size monumental. The identification of it is really a little mystery, so I wanted to talk to you about how I go through my analysis to make an identification of it and what we think it might be worth.
Okay.
Now, tell me, where did you get it?
I purchased it from an estate sale about 20 years ago.
Okay, and I suspect it probably was a pair.
It was. I just purchased the one.
Again, its size, I'd call it monumental. I think it's really beautiful. The color is often known as Bristol blue, which is an English term, but it is not Bristol blue because really Bristol blue never comes in this size.
Okay.
So when I first looked at it, I thought, as you mentioned, is it Bohemian glass?
Right.
No, because typically when it's blue, the blue is cased over a clear body, and this is blue all the way through.
Okay.
Is it Scandinavian? Couldn't really find any comparable forms or anything of this size. And really, we've settled on English. And the reason we think it's English, if you look at the finial here, this faceted cut, this circular section that's faceted, and the way you've got this spreading faceted decoration on the top, as well as the base, is something pretty typical that you'll see in decanters and such in English glass.
Okay.
In terms of dating, not so easy. It's in really beautiful condition, but there is a little bit of damage and there's wear commensurate with use and age.
Right.
So I'm kind of thinking it's about the first quarter of the 20th century, 1900 to say 1925.
Okay.
Again, it's a really special thing, and it must have looked really grand on a sideboard or, you know, in a center table. I think it would look beautiful in any home. And a lot of its value derives from its quality as a decoration.
Okay.
The workmanship on it is lovely. Do you have any idea what you think it's worth?
Well, I actually paid between $75 and $100 for it.
Okay.
So,
Well, I think you'll be pleased to know if I had it at an auction, I'd probably say it would be at auction about $400 to $600, but I suspect it would go higher because it's just a lovely, lovely thing.
okay. Great. Great.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
This is a lamp that was popular in the sort of post-World War II period.
Look around. Think how precious each of these antiques is to their proud owner. You can easily imagine how devastating a flood or fire or maybe just mold might be to these treasured mementos. Appraisers Lyman Speckhauer and Lex Reeves give us timely tips on navigating the daunting world of insuring, restoring, and protecting your vintage valuables.
You hate to think of things being in a fire or having a fire of your home, but I brought some different things to kind of show what happens after the fire.
Right.
What are some things you would think about?
Well, you know, I try and tell clients and customers that it's important to know what your collection is and do your due diligence before. You might want to get an appraisal, but go ahead and do the research yourself. You can kind of get online and see what maybe this artist is selling for online on eBay, and that way you don't have to necessarily bring in an expert right away. But if you start getting to a point where you feel you have a collection that might need a certified appraiser, you can once again jump online, and there are two different societies. There's the American Society of Appraisers and the International Society of Appraisers, and they'll give a listing of who's in your area, and you can set up for an appraisal. But appraisals can be expensive, so that's why I do advise go ahead and do something first. Try and do a little bit of research yourself.
You know, in a home, it's not always the most expensive thing that is the most important to you if you were to have a loss that you would want to save.
Absolutely, and you know, when I've had clients that have had losses, many times even items that are expensive are not the things they're upset about. They're upset about photographs, family photographs,
Exactly.
family history. So that kind of brings us to, when we talked about it, a plan for an evacuation. If it's a fire, get out. Don't take anything.
Exactly.
Get your family, your pets, you get out of the house. But if you know there's a hurricane,
Right. You could look around your house and decide, what if?
sure.
What would I want to save so that if you have something happen, there's a whole industry of fire and water
Right.
services. And different things have different materials. You can see that glass is our friend.
Right, right. Plexi in a fire is not.
Right, and it depends how close it was.
Sure,
You
sure.
know, heat can cause irreparable damage.
Right,
Smoke, not so much.
right.
But, you know, you have to decide what's important. Some things aren't worth
Right.
either being appraised or repaired.
Right, and so in an instance like that, if we look at its value before the fire, probably is under $200.
Right.
And we know that the insurance company would probably not be prepared to pay. How much would something like that cost to restore offhand?
Well, there's a reason that I still own it.
Right,
Right.
right.
It's because the restoration cost exceeds the value of the piece, and
Sure.
that's where it stops. And of course, sometimes people own things that they love dearly, but they may have had previous restorations. Like this painting has had a previous restoration. You can barely see it here in a little bump, but if you look on the back, you can see that there has been a repair,
Right,
not from the fire,
right. That would entail further restoration.
but which is not
which
covered
is not covered.
under.
So it might be
Exactly.
another, 30, 40% adding to the bill.
Right. Depending what you had, you may want to save a mink coat from your great aunt.
Right.
The fire and water industry includes, in addition to the emergency people who are sucking the water out, there's specialty vendors for clothing, for art,
Sure.
for antique furniture who know how to handle the different materials that people have.
Right.
And it's just perhaps before something happens, when you're thinking about it,
Be
maybe
prepared.
look online
Right.
for those types of people and
Right.
think about what you own and find that, kind of go through it in your head so you be prepared.
Right. I think a lot of people aren't prepared, and that's
know
what we're
I'm
here for,
not.
to help them be prepared.
I'm not prepared. Maybe I'll go do that this weekend.
Me too. I like that idea.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Welcome to Chesapeake Collectibles, and thank you for bringing something for us to look at. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. It's a beer stein. It's from my grandfather, Carl. We live in Germany. He emigrated just before you couldn't immigrate anymore during Hitler's reign. And that's basically all I know about it. I have a few steins at home. I thought this was the most interesting one.
It might be a little bit before your grandfather. I
Oh.
would think perhaps your grandfather's father, because on the side of this pewter mug, it says "Voor herinneren of my Verlobung which is in memory of my engagement on the 26th of December, 1896.
Oh.
This stein was made by F. Barth, B-A-R-T-H, in Munich in 1871, and it's signed here on a little reserve panel that shows it. It looks very fun as a pillow fight. You see the one little fellow here, and he's beating up the other one who's climbing up the handle here. But what's more fun about this is that it's really an allegory of the Franco-Prussian War.
Okay.
And this is emblematic of the problems they were having in Europe at this time. You had Otto von Bismarck, who was head of the German Confederation, the North German Confederation, and you had Napoleon III, who was upset about the imbalance of power that was about to take place. So you have the beginning of the Franco-Prussian War, which lasted only 6 months, from July 1870 to January 1871. So the French attacked Prussia and their friends, and the Germans beat them and actually captured Napoleon III. So this is this fight that's going on between them. So it's an allegory of that fight, which makes it, I think, very, very, very funny. Well, it's interesting, in looking up values for you, there is a wide variety of different values. One I've seen as high as $1,600, but most of them do not go that high. Most of them fall in a range of $400 to $600.
Okay.
So that, I think, is what you might be able to expect at auction.
That's cool.
Great. I thought it was cool, too. Thank you for bringing it in.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Chesapeake Collectibles. I was very, very interested in the items that you brought in, and I was wondering if you would share a little bit of the story with us on the sword and the picture of the man that owned it.
Yes, sure, thank you. This is my grandfather, John Jerry Worth. He was a mining engineer in the West, as well as an Army scout during the Indian Wars, and later a Rough Rider with Teddy Roosevelt. He collected all the Western material that's in the Hershey Museum up in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which I've seen within the last 20 years, mainly basketry, Navajo basketry, and jewelry. A lot of interesting items.
Oh, he was quite a guy.
In his own way, he was. So that is his portrait somewhere in midlife. This is a photograph of him with Buffalo Bill after, I believe, the Battle of Wounded Knee. That's the original photograph, and this is one from a historic magazine. And this is his Rough Rider's sword, which was left to me.
Well, the first thing I want to tell you is the sword is probably not Rough Riders, but it's right after. It's a pattern of 1902 Army officer's saber. The extremely high engraving on it, along with his name that shows up on there. And it's something you should be very proud of. You've never had an appraisal done on it?
No, I haven't.
I'll tell you first, this type of sword, 1902 officer's sword, would generally sell in the $500 to $600 range. However, having said that, the engraving on this is superior. The story is beyond belief of the man that owned it. And I'm going to say that I think it's worth between $2,500 to $3,000.
Well, that's great. We're never going to sell it, but that's wonderful.
No, obviously wouldn't. And that does not include the portrait or anything else. But this is one of the type of items that is story-driven, and the history of it outweighs the actual value of the sword itself. Even though this one, as I say, I feel very confident we go with the story in the $2,500 to $3,000.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
I really want to tell you how happy I was to see it. It's the nicest one I've seen.
That's all the time we have for today, but we'll be back to bring you more precious finds and priceless stories. Here's a glimpse of next week's show.
We brought in some artifacts today relating to a very important Maryland story. Betsy married Jerome Bonaparte, brother of Napoleon.
This piece is a really nice piece of Americana.
The silver is a presentation cup that was awarded to Marmion, which was Charles Benedict Calvert's prize cow, an award-winning cow.
Worn around your neck with the sign to ward off any attacks from evil spirits that might be interested in young Western males who were running around in China.
Right.
Thank you for joining us on this fascinating trip down memory lane. We'll have much more next week. I'm your host, Rhea Feiken.
Major funding is provided by... Since 1924, Alex Cooper Auctioneers has been serving the Mid-Atlantic states, featuring monthly gallery antique auction sales. Our staff can assist clients with the disposition of their valued possessions. Alex Cooper Auctioneers.